Sounds good.
All right.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to be talking a little bit about empowering clients to take action through motivational interviewing. So I remember as part of like the AFC study materials, they kind of glazed over this really quick, but I think it's such a powerful um, technique that I wanted to get more into it. And this is especially helpful because if you have clients that are struggling or hesitant to like set goals or aren't really following up on those goals, it can be helpful to try and get to the root of where those challenges may be coming from and help them to be able to tackle difficult behaviors or topics with grace instead of like feeling awkward or not knowing exactly how to address the situation. And I apologize, I don't have the chat up right now. So if you have something to add, please just like unmute yourself and say it. We'll be kind of chatting throughout. So I'm not afraid of that.
And I'm watching it for you too.
Thank you. That is great. Okay, so we'll start here by talking about how money is emotional. So just to kind of get things going, I want you all to look at this list of money related things. And I would love for you to we'll just take like 1 minute to think about an experience from our own lives. And then we'll have a couple people share, including myself. So a time when you purchased a gift for someone that was special for them, when you had a large upcoming expense, you accomplished a goal or didn't accomplish a goal, didn't have enough money to pay bills or purchase an item that you love. So I'll give you a second to think about that and then we'll share.
All right. Anybody have one they want to share? Paid off large credit card debts.
Yes, that's a great one. I love that. And during that little interim, I was able to get the chat pulled up. So I do have that up on my
Okay, good.
side now. Okay, paying off student loans, great. Felt like I've lost 50 pounds. Love that. Saver to spender, paid off our home. Very good. Bought the first house. Making 18,000 a year. Wow, that's awesome. Large upcoming expense, college for the high school senior. That's awesome. Fancy bike trip. Love that. Yeah, one that I shared in previous times with this presentation is I am a self-proclaimed minimalist, and so I try not to like buy extra things, as we just learned from Gen Z. Don't like having extra stuff. But one of my favorite things that I own is my apple slicer, one of the round ones that cuts the apple and you just go, whoop. I love that utensil. It is so useful. I use it probably pretty much every day. Okay, we've got planning extra for retirement. Love that. Deciding whether to buy a new computer. Yeah, and I think it's interesting because we can see even just in kind of describing these things in the chat, we can kind of get a sense of what some of those different emotions might be. Like obviously paying off debts is probably a really awesome feeling. Amy mentioned going from being a saver to a spender, so that probably has a certain degree of, uncomfortable, changing habits. And so it is, okay, Yankee candles, love it. Yep, tons. So everything that is related to money is really emotional. And so if we think about for our clients, especially who may not have, a lot of the basics or fundamentals of those things, it can be really stressful to get things in place and adjust their behaviors to be more financially savvy, right? So in this, I have on here a list of money scripts and mindsets, which a script is an expectation based on past experience of how things kind of work. And these things can cause clients to kind of get into a rut or struggle to make progress if they're kind of stuck in these things. And so we have on here the 4 main money scripts. I'm not going to go into super great detail about that because I want to focus more on the motivational interviewing technique, but they're here listed: money avoidance, money worship, money status, money vigilance. And these things can manifest themselves in different ways. Like they're not necessarily going to be like, I avoid money like the plague, or I just want to earn more money. They could say things like, I can't stick to a budget. I just don't look at my bank account anymore because it stresses me out. Or my spending isn't that bad. And so if we can kind of learn to recognize these things, then we can help get some motivational interviewing going to be able to get to the root of these issues and help the client feel more empowered to make changes. So motivational interviewing has 4 pieces. And I have this link at the bottom. I will drop it in the chat at the end just because it's a really helpful kind of overview of motivational interviewing. It gives some examples, and so you can use that as a reference as you move forward. But I'm just going to walk through each of the steps, and then we'll talk through a couple examples and hopefully get some practice in. We'll see how the time goes. So the first step of motivational interviewing, oh, and I should mention, theoretically, you would be doing all of these steps as part of one session with a client. So the first step is engaging. And so at this point, is at the very beginning, and you're trying to establish a productive working relationship. So establishing the trust between counselor and client through careful listening, like understanding where the client's coming from, affirming their strengths, and supporting their autonomy. And so this kind of starts out with getting to know the person and establishing that trust. Then once you've kind of gotten comfortable, then you can focus in, which is where you agree with the client on a shared purpose. And so this gives you as the counselor permission to move into a more directional conversation about a behavior or a question that they had or a change that needs to be made. And that also helps keep the client from getting like super defensive, right? Because if you agree together that we're going to discuss that issue, then they're not going to feel like you're just coming out of nowhere saying, you need to change these things. And so you can do that by asking questions like, what would you like to focus on today? What were you hoping to discuss today? Or if there's a specific behavior you're wanting to address, you can say, should we talk about this thing now? And then the client will say, yes, let's do it, which then allows you to move into the evoking piece of motivational interviewing, which is potentially the one where there's the most potential for like some discomfort, but we kind of want that because we want the client to recognize the need for change and build their own reasons why that change needs to happen. And so there's a list of questions that I have on the next slide that are specific evoking questions. And so we'll kind of walk through those, but the goal of that portion of it is to help the client see the need for change and understand why they specifically want to make that change. So that's evoking. Then lastly, the planning stage is where you discuss the how of change. And the important thing to include to here or to mention here is that the the goal of this piece of it is to work with the client to come up with a plan. And so having them brainstorm some thoughts instead of necessarily just saying, this is what you need to do, but helping them come up with a plan that will work for them. So those are the 4 steps. Does anyone have any questions on those? Great.
None.
So here are the evoking questions that can help you through this process. So things like, what's the worst thing that has happened as a result of whatever thing? How important would it be for you to blank? How confident are you that you could blank? What motivates you to change? What changes have you noticed since you did this thing? What would change if you did this thing? How are things different before? And then on the last one is probably my personal favorite just because it helps really dig deep into the issue. So you say, on a scale from 1 to 10, how important is it for you to make this change? And then based off of what they say, you say, why would you say that number instead of perhaps a lower or higher number, just to get an understanding of why they rank it on that scale? Does that make sense? So there are those. So at this point, I have an example client, but I would love if someone would be willing to do just like a super quick role play with me so I can walk you through how to actually apply. So all you have to do is just pretend to be my client who struggles with emotional spending. Is someone willing to help me with that?
Sure,
Sure.
I'll help you. Oh, Amy.
Go ahead, Lucas.
Go ahead. Okay.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Lucas.
Yeah.
Okay, and so since this is like a role play situation, I'm gonna like kind of break it up into, you know, certain pieces. And so I'll pause and kind of point things out or things like that. So it's not going to be like one fluid thing. But yeah, okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So first step is engaging with asking questions, active listening, validating, and affirming. In fact, I don't even know if I want to do this part because I feel like we all kind of know how to do that. So we'll just pretend Lucas and I are having this great conversation. We're chatting. We're both feeling comfortable. We've established that relationship of trust between counselor and client. And so now we'll go ahead and role play the focus section. Okay, so Lucas, I'm really excited to have talked about those things, and it sounds like you've had a good week so far with your spending and are feeling good about all of those things. You'd mentioned previously that you are quick to spend money when you're emotional. So like if you have a bad day at work, it's easy to, grab a drink on the way home or buy something on Amazon. Would you like to discuss that a little bit more now?
Yeah, that is a problem that I struggle with pretty frequently. And one that's really hit me most recent is I just love my dogs. And when I'm really stressed out and I'm coming home from work and thinking about my dogs, I just want to stop at the pet store and get them a whole bunch of stuff to get my mind off of work. And I've been doing that a lot lately.
Have you? Yeah. How frequently would you say that that's happening?
Over the past couple weeks, I've probably done it 2 or 3 times a week, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. So it sounds like you are especially prone to getting things for your dogs when you're feeling emotional. Would you say that that's right?
Yeah, it really helps get my mind off of everything else.
What kind of things do you buy, just out of curiosity?
I love going in and just looking at all the new dog treats. The place I go has tons of options and they rotate them out. So I just stop in and can get like duck hearts and hooves and just all this crazy stuff. And I come home and I just drop it on the floor. My dogs go nuts, and it's just so fun to watch.
Oh, I love that. Well, and the thing that's so interesting is that it seems like those purchases do bring like a certain amount of joy and like diffusing some of that stress. So I'm really intrigued to talk more about that and see what is kind of motivating your desire for change. Okay, so pause there for a quick second. So we got through that focus section of where he said, yep, I'm ready to talk about emotional spending, shared some experiences that he's had. And it's important throughout the whole process to kind of rephrase, paraphrase what they're saying so that they feel heard and validated throughout that process. So now we'll go into the evoking section, which is where we kind of dig to the root of it. And this specific situation is really interesting because to me, I'm like, I don't know if it's like a super big deal to like buy a bunch of dog treats, but I'm excited to talk with the client, with Lucas, to see why this is causing some stress for him. So that's what we're going to do next. Okay. So as if we just like are carrying over from the last part, what would you say is the worst thing that has happened as a result of this emotional spending?
I would say I kind of feel guilty about spending hundreds of dollars on dog treats in a week. As much joy as it brings me, after the fact, I do kind of feel guilty about it because I know that I'm trying, as we've talked about before, trying to get to retirement and I've got trips I want to do. And I realize that it is kind of distracting me from those longer term goals.
Mm-hmm. Totally. So there's a certain level of guilt that you're feeling. Would you say that that spending is really interfering with some of the goals that we've set?
I would, I don't want to admit it, but yeah, it probably is. Because I don't have a lot of extra space for savings. And so
Right.
I think that if I really stare it in the face, I think it's probably having a negative impact.
Yeah. And so on a scale of 1 to 10, how important would you say it is for you to get that spending under control?
Oh, it just brings me so much joy to buy the treats. Right now, it's probably a 5 just because the work is so stressful and it helps so much in the moment.
Uh-huh.
If I don't know, but I do really want to retire and go on these trips. I probably need a little more time, but I'd say right now probably about a 5.
Okay. And why would you say a 5 instead of maybe a 1 or 2?
Just because I know that I do have other goals, and I realize that if I let this get too out of control, I'm not going to reach those goals.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Okay, that's really good. Okay, pause really quick there. So these types of questions are really important because you can kind of see that almost that dissonance in Lucas's mind and heart as he's trying to balance, the joy of loving his dogs and giving them those things, but then also the other goals that he has. So at this point in the conversation, I'm going to now flip into the planning piece where I'll maybe brainstorm some ideas with Lucas to see how the behavior could be improved upon. And I'm loving all of the comments in the chat, by the way. I think this is awesome. Okay.
All
Okay,
these
we'll go back.
dog lovers are triggered.
I know. I know. I didn't think it would be as a touchy subject, but I think it's good. It's good and it's important. Okay, so we can go back into it. Okay, so Lucas, with that, all of that being said, you mentioned that the the importance of getting the emotional spending under control is at about a 5 because you're trying to balance that love for your dogs and wanting to give them treats with accomplishing these other goals that we've talked about. So what ideas do you have that maybe could help with some of these challenges?
Well, I was talking to somebody at work and they had suggested that maybe I start making homemade treats, and
Oh,
that could help save a little bit of money, perhaps.
uh-huh.
And I could think about doing that. The other thing could be just not give them as many treats. That's easy. I don't know if they'll love me any less if I don't know if they'll notice. Um, so those are a couple things. I don't really want to just give it all up, but I one thing I do know is I can't go into the store if I really want to make this change, because I'm just going to go overboard and buy too many.
Right. Totally. So with the possibility of doing homemade treats, what does that look like? I don't have dogs, so I don't even know what that process would be. Is it kind of an ordeal to make them?
I actually have no idea. This person was telling me that it's pretty easy, but I could go online and do some research and see what kind of things are out there. I would think that I could probably just mix a bunch of stuff that dogs like and put it in the oven, bake it, and give it to them. I can't be that much harder than like making cookies or something. So it
Right, right. And do you typically enjoy cooking or preparing food in general?
I don't mind it. It takes me a little motivation to get started, as long as I have a plan. If I have a plan in
Mm-hmm.
place and I know that this is on my schedule, I can do it. But it just takes me a little bit to sit down and actually write out that plan and know when I'm gonna dive in.
Totally. Which, I mean, if that's the case, it might be a little bit tricky to try and plan on making the homemade treats because it's like you never know when you're going to have a really stressful day at work and be like, I need to get them the treats. And so, in that moment, are you going to be motivated to, go home and make the treats and then give them to them? But I think that is a really good option that would probably save some money for sure. What other ideas do you have? Any, because you mentioned specifically, like if you go into the store, then it's a problem. How do you feel like
Well,
you can mitigate that a little bit?
yeah, going into the store, I guess it's kind of connected to what you were just talking about. I could, if I can set some time aside on the weekend and just make a whole bunch of treats and know that they're there,
Mm-hmm.
I could just look forward to giving them the treats I already have. Because that's one of the things is I tend to just give them everything and then there's nothing left. And then the next day I have this desire to stop and get more. But if I just make a
Right.
whole bunch, like more than I could give them in a day, then I would always have some available. So that might be a one way around it.
I think that's a great idea, especially then because when you're like driving home thinking, oh, I kind of want to stop at the store, you can say, but wait, I already made all of these treats at home, so I have them there and I can still have that joy of, giving them the treats without having to go and buy a bunch right now. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so we'll pause there. I'm loving all of the stuff.
Darcy, I totally think For all the people who are going to watch this later, we need to go through the brainstorming that everybody in class just did because it's fantastic. I don't
Uh-huh.
it as if you were going because I was like, oh my gosh, set a treat limit, treat budget, give them human food as treats. How about a sprout on the way home? They love you regardless. You don't need to give them a treat, right? Take them on a walk instead. What about a prepaid treat card or the envelope with cash?
Mm-hmm.
Trade your dog in for a cat. That was just a joke.
Yeah.
Budgeted amount you want to give them. Go into the store with only cat or without cash. Ooh, that's very interesting. Lots of really great brainstorming, everybody.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you, Lucas, for being willing to be the client in this situation. And so
Of
the
course.
interesting thing is that as a counselor, I don't think that I would have thought about even suggesting the idea of making homemade treats. But to Lucas, that seemed like that was the first thing that he brought up. And so if we can run with that and make sure and see if that's something that they want to do, then they'll be more likely to stick to it because he said specifically, I could set aside some time on the weekends to do this. And so it was his plan. And so that way be easier for him to stick to it moving forward. So does anyone have any questions on that whole process, kind of how that works? And it's okay if you don't.
It was a great example.
I have a question, Darcy. So
Sure.
your client expressed that this is something that happens as a result of stress at work. So as a financial counselor, would you say that that's out of scope, or would you talk to them about, hey, what's causing stress at work and help them to brainstorm about that as well?
That's a really good question. I would say for me, I would probably focus more on helping the financial behavior, but I probably would briefly discuss the stress at work to see if it's something that could be um, mitigated or if there's any strategies we can implement to get rid of the cause of the stress at work. I mean, obviously, I'm not like a therapist or like career counselor, so I would, be careful with that. But I think that's an interesting point of getting to the root issue of the stress at work and then trying to find ways to help that so that it therefore helps the emotional spending. And if anyone else has thoughts on that question, you're welcome to share those. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, I think to me that I would say you could bring it or ask about it, but then you'd actually get more knowledge on what that root cause was. Like it could be like I don't feel like I'm making enough money and I go home and whatever it may be. It could be a money related root cause that we just don't know. But if we do think that it's something else, then yeah, that where we refer them to somebody else as far as counseling and stuff like that.
Yeah, super true. And so, I mean, even using some of those evoking questions of like, what is causing this stress at work, like Herbie mentioned, it could actually end up being a financial concern, in which case, even better. So I think that's great.
So I don't know if this is like a disorder. I don't know if there's such thing as a spending disorder. You tell me. But I know a family member who is basically struggling with spending, emotional spending, and she buys a lot of stuff to make her feel good. But I also think it's part of it was through going through her marriage struggles. So, I like the fact that you have these steps: engage, focus, evoke, and planning, because asking those questions could help you find why she's doing what she's doing. And at the same time, she can answer those questions. Like, I think, I don't know how I figure out the answer. I think I never knew I was doing it with your steps, but that's how I found out. It was because she was going through marital issues, and it made her feel good to spend time on herself, since she never got that appreciation from her spouse or whatever.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could be a really interesting conversation. And I think the thing that I like about the motivational interviewing is that it helps us get to that root cause, so that we can almost treat the, or not the root cause, but that true motivation for the client, and run with that, instead of being on that kind of surface level of, you're overspending, you need to get the spending in check, but understanding some of the emotional pieces behind it, so that you can then help them be motivated to change. So I think it's a really helpful technique. So yeah, I've got just a quick slide here that just kind of sums up everything we've talked about, and I will also share that link in the chat. But thank you everyone for your participation.
This was great. Thanks so much.